Most of my research is about litigation and civil government enforcement, especially in corporate and securities law. And this particular project is about the SEC. And so Securities and Exchange Commission, this is a federal independent agency, and its job is to protect investors and also just to make sure that the capital markets run well. So one of its jobs is to police fraud. Here's the example from the headlines this week. This is Elon Musk. But you can picture Ponzi schemes, insider trading, and just other cases of securities fraud, especially misstatements by corporations about how well they're doing. So these are all within the SEC's wheelhouse. And often we think of agencies in the regulatory state, including the SEC, as working alone. So Congress creates the agency and tells it what to do. And in law, often we study this single agency. One reason for that is that we don't have a lot of tools in law for looking at multiple actors. Sometimes we look at bilateral relationships, sometimes we look at centralization, but most of the time we're not examining a large number and heterogeneous interactions. And in enforcement, it's even more difficult. This is basically like prosecutors or prosecutions, investigations and subpoenas and various things that happen behind closed doors. So it's doubly difficult to identify coordination in this area. But the reality is that agencies often have to coordinate. Many problems cross legal borders, or you can think of virtual currency, or problems that really are just without borders. So to have a really good understanding of what's going on, how the regulatory state functions, we need to be able to study this coordination. And so that, a couple of years ago, or a while ago, let's say, I had this thought. First, if we can do this any place, surely here I can find somebody at the U of I to help me figure this out. I also had an idea about a possible publicly available source that really hadn't been tapped. So every time the SEC takes an enforcement action, it makes it public in a press release or a litigation release. We could read the Elon Musk one. I've made my students do that kind of thing. These describe the action, what the SEC did it file a complaint, did it settle, did it freeze assets. They announce this, and then at the end of the release, it says, we appreciate the assistance of so-and-so, or we acknowledge the assistance and cooperation, or we're grateful for. Actually, they don't say they're grateful for it, but the other ones are actually examples. And then they list other agencies or police departments or entities. I'll show you a couple of examples. This is just an NFL player who was insider trading. For our purposes, the key is that at the very end, they talk about who helped them with the investigation, U.S. attorneys, etc. And you can see this pattern. This is a Bitcoin-related action. The SEC appreciates the assistance of the U.S. attorneys. And same thing here is just a Ponzi scheme one. And you can see we've got the SEC involved. If we're trying to start thinking about coordination, SEC is always involved in these. But you've got the FBI, the U.S. Postal Inspector Service, which for some reason I find comical, but it isn't. It's a real law enforcement service. And then various authorities from Florida. So you can see lots of examples from this. And my thought was to use this information to map out a network of the SEC's acknowledgments as a way to complicate how we think of agencies, and also really to look into this black box. We don't have that many ways to do it, and this would be one. And so with help, an iSchool student wrote a program that scraped the SEC website and extracted this information. And with a lot of work from humans as well, but I have data from more than 20 years. And you can see a snapshot. This is just 1 year of data. This is a snapshot of 2016. It shows a bunch of repeat players. FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office are the big circles there. FINRA, a financial regulatory authority, but you also see lots of smaller players and lots of a mix of domestic and international actors here. So I said this is in part a pitch. I showed you examples of SEC releases, but frankly, all of them look essentially the same. And this is often true of legal texts. So I want to make the plug that there's quite a bit of relatively standardized text and relatively discrete questions, and not a lot of work done in this area. So I'll end with this slide, which is really the backstory of the project. Law professors often work alone, more so than in other disciplines, but not this time. Here you can recognize a number of people from this panel and from this event. The smiley faces are my happy research assistants. Yeah, I'm looking at you. And several people in IT at the law school. And I'm very grateful for all the help.